Throughout history, diseases and pandemics have shaped world events. From the Black Death to the recent coronavirus outbreak, diseases have shaped politics, economics, and the fate of empires and civilizations. Today we look at 5 times diseases changed world history. This is Knowledge Voyage.
But before this video starts, don't forget to hit subscribe and hit the bell so that you can get all of our weekly videos about history. Thank you.
When the Roman Empire split in two, the eastern half of the empire had always had the ambition to recapture the western half. This was particularly true because the western half was now controlled by Germanic barbarian tribes, and the Eastern Empire looked down on them. In 533 AD, Eastern Emperor Justinian launched a campaign to recapture the west, and things were going very well, as North Africa and much of Italy were reconquered. But then, disaster struck. There was a sudden shift in world climate, and this has been confirmed through modern science. Plague rats from Africa reacted to changes in the climate and extended their range further north than usual. This meant that the Egyptian port of Alexandria, a major hub for trade in the Eastern Empire, was full of plague rats. The rats spread all through the Roman Empire, and both the bubonic and pneumonic forms of the plague would take hold. The Persian Empire took advantage of the plague by attacking its old enemy, the Eastern Roman Empire, only for Persian soldiers to become infected with the plague as well. The Eastern Roman and Persian empires both suffered massive depopulations in their armies, making their border forts much weaker, and this made them much easier to conquer when Arab Muslims invaded them. As a nomadic people, Arabs were less affected by the plague than the Roman and Persian settled empires. What caused the climate change that spread plague rats into Alexandria is still not clear. There are theories from volcanic eruptions to a meteor strike, but whatever caused the Justinian Plague, it had several massive historical impacts. The Roman Empire could have been reunited had the plague not struck. The plague weakened the Persian and Eastern Roman empires critically, and the forces of Islam were able to expand dramatically at their expense. The Mongol Empire created one of the world's first forms of globalization. Much like today's model, it was anchored in China and connected to Europe. At its peak, the famous Silk Road connected the two continents with trading goods and ideas, but in the 1300s, disaster struck. The Silk Road had many shaggy-haired camels, and these were perfect for plague fleas. The Silk Road was dotted with wet markets, which, as the recent coronavirus outbreak shows, are dangerous incubators of illness. The plague swept along the Silk Road, and it wasn't long before city after city was falling to the plague. As the trade posts on the Silk Road fell into disuse from the plague, taxes were not collected, and soldiers and officials went unpaid. This all caused immense problems, and unrest in the previously stable Mongol Empire. As the locals turned on their Mongol overlords, they began to become more nationalistic. In China, the ruling Mongol dynasty was overthrown by the Ming, who isolated China for centuries after that. The Mongols had built the world's biggest land empire, but it was dismembered in a few short years because of the plague. The Asia it left behind was poorer, more nationalistic, and less connected to the world system as a result. In the 1300s, the Mongols were besieging Kaffa in the Crimea region. They fired plague-infected bodies over the walls to spread disease inside, and they hoped this would quicken the city's surrender. Unfortunately, Kaffa was a major port, and very connected with trade routes to Venice, Constantinople, and Genoa. As the plague-infected rats spread from Kaffa to the port cities of Europe, the plague ran riot. The bubonic plague was spread by bites from fleas, and in the overcrowded and often unhygienic streets of the Middle Ages, rats were commonly seen in the streets. The plague also had a second variant called pneumonic plague. This was spread by coughing and sneezing, and this person-to-person transmission made it even more infectious. It wasn't long before 50% of Europe's population was dead. Things got so bad that rivers were declared to be holy ground so that mass burials at sea could take place there. In the desperation, many turned to praying at saint shrines, but to no avail. Others wandered around whipping themselves to show God they were sorry for their sins and thus avoid the plague. As more and more people died, simple families were bankrupted by paying for prayers to release loved ones from purgatory. The Protestant movement attacked the idea of praying to saints and the existence of purgatory, and many people who had been disheartened during the plague turned to Protestantism. So in this sense, the Black Death paved the way for the Protestant Reformation. In 1519, the Spanish adventurer Hernán Cortés went to Mexico with a band of soldiers. Initially welcomed as gods into the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, the locals soon realized they were intending to conquer them and revolted. Cortés's troops fought their way out of the city, and it looked like his dreams of wealth and fame were gone. But fortunately for him, nature had some reinforcements in the form of the plague. There had been an outbreak of smallpox on Cuba shortly before the conquistadors embarked for Mexico. They took the illness with them, and when the Spanish were initially driven out of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec troops looted their clothes, which were infected with smallpox. The Aztecs had never been exposed to this illness, so rapidly succumbed to the sickness. When Cortés and his armies returned to Tenochtitlan, they were shocked at the scale of loss of life they found. This mass loss of life helped the Spanish conquer Aztec Mexico, and a similar fate befell the Incas of Peru a few years later. Had it not been for the smallpox, there is every chance the Europeans would never have conquered the New World. Also, the high vulnerability of natives to these illnesses spurred the transatlantic slave trade to fill the plantations. Because of the massive drop in the native population, the Spanish turned to Africa for a new workforce, and the transatlantic slave trade was sadly born. In 1918, it looked like World War I was about to end, but at an army base in Kansas, young fit soldiers seemed to be dying in alarming numbers. Wartime censorship meant that the disease couldn't be reported on, and this meant only neutral countries could report the illness. So when neutral Spain began to report their outbreak, people in combatant countries assumed that since they were the only people talking about it, the disease must have started there. The so-called Spanish flu spread like wildfire through the young of the world. The dirty trenches of World War I, filled with dirt, rats, and millions of young men jammed together for months at a time, were perfect breeding grounds for the disease. As sick troops were sent home on leave, they spread the illness in train stations, hotels, and ports. There were also 150,000 Chinese labourers working with the Allied armies. China has long been a source of dangerous pandemics, and it is unclear to what extent, if any, the Chinese labourers may have had in spreading the disease. Attempts to fight the disease initially failed. In Zamora, in Spain, a local cleric ignored bans on gatherings, and large church services crammed sick people into crowded churches. They then kissed the relics of St. Rocco and shared communion cups. The result, predictably, was a sharp rise of infections in the city. It wasn't long before the Spanish flu was running riot, and scientists were particularly worried at how it targeted the young and the fit. Unlike normal flu, which tends to kill older and weaker people, the Spanish flu was killing the young. The reason for this is that the Spanish flu was provoking what scientists call cytokine storms. When we get sick, our immune systems release white blood cells to fight the infection. In a cytokine storm, we release so many white blood cells, they begin not just to attack the infection, but to attack healthy tissue as well. Ironically, because young fit people have a strong immune system, this means their system's going to hyper overdrive. Someone with a weaker immune system would not be affected in the same way, since their systems are slower to respond and are less aggressive. The Spanish flu ended up killing more people than had died in World War I. The loss of life led many survivors to adopt a fatalistic view of life. The live for today libertine values of the flapper era can in part be traced back to this cheapness for life. As well as this libertine live for today, die tomorrow attitude, the vengeful and atavistic politics of the 1930s can also have their roots in the Spanish flu and the desperation it created. So there you have it, 5 times that diseases have shaped history. With the COVID outbreak going on, it remains to be seen how this will change history too. But one thing is certain, it absolutely will. Thanks for watching everyone, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.